So let's now briefly talk about communion, which is misunderstood probably about as much, if not more, than baptism. So like baptism, the ordinance of communion varies depending on the religious organization with which a person identifies. For instance, Catholics typically practice communion in a very solemn and mysterious air, whereby symbolic bread and wine become manifestation of Jesus after being ingested. This belief is called or deals with transubstantiation. On the other hand, most Protestants believe that communion is an intimate sharing of symbolic bread and wine taken in remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice and the covenant it made possible. Our church holds to the latter. I think most Protestants again do. We try to take the mystery out of this and understand that in itself doesn't save us. It is a public act, a remembrance, if you will. And if you'd like to explore this further, it really has its origins, its roots in the Passover feast, of which Jesus celebrated and fulfilled. Protestants regularly conduct communion to give Jesus' followers an opportunity to share in the remembering of Jesus' sacrifice and our covenant with God. The celebration is meant for anyone who has committed themselves to God out of belief in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, and intends to remain in that covenant. In other words, they have a right heart. The truth is that our practice of communion has very little to do with its origin. I mentioned Passover a moment ago. So when Jesus was celebrating the Passover celebration with his Jewish disciples, he pointed out that they were to remember his sacrifice in the fulfillment of the Passover and the covenant enabled by that sacrifice. The earliest Christians put into practice this remembrance of Passover fulfillment by what is called the table fellowship, whereby they ate communal meals, and together, and they worshiped during those times in response to their new life through Christ. They were a community. And this is something we should return to. So religion has warped, unfortunately, and mystified what began as a simple fulfillment and appreciation in that community. And communion has nothing to do with devotion to God and entry into his kingdom and salvation from coming wrath and its destruction. It doesn't save you. Complete devotion to God through Christ, charitable love out of obedience will. However, communion, let's read some scriptures so you can learn more about it. First of all, read Luke chapter 22, verses 14 to 20. Jesus explains his sacrifice in the Passover fulfillment. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23, Paul reiterates the sacrifice, the covenant, and the remembrance. So let me ask you a question at this point. Again, please pause and consider if you'd like. What have you heard about the practice of communion? Perhaps if you're Catholic, you have Protestant friends. If you're Protestant, maybe you have Catholic friends. What have you heard? Do you believe it is something in which all followers of Jesus should participate? Believe it or not, I have fellowshipped with Christians who have believed that communion isn't necessary and is something that we don't, not only shouldn't do, but, or don't do, no longer have to do, but in fact should not do. I don't fall into any of those categories. All right, that's enough for now. Stay tuned to Christian Foundations Module 4, where we'll introduce developing spiritual disciplines of dealing with temptation, Bible study, and prayer. So don't miss out. And in the meantime, make sure you catch and save the references at the end of this video. In fact, you may want to take screenshots and put them in a folder somewhere for later use. And I'll just tell you that if you want to find printed versions of these lessons, you can find them at findingdiscipleship.org. So speaking of salvation and rescuing, I encourage you, again, to read my book, Finding the End of the World, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble websites. You can also visit my site at www.ronbraley.com, RONBRALEY, to download free snippets and learn more about me and my work. Please also visit us at www.findingdiscipleship.org to learn more about our mission to equip believers unknown by God to become followers that He knows and saves. May God richly bless you. And remember, you don't want to be caught with your spiritual pants down. So what do? You put on your discipleship shorts. Thank you and God bless you.